And now we are going to have our 10 minutes Q&A, and which our two guest speakers are going to answer. So we have one from our audience, and this is a question from Ikichuku from Germany, and asking, EU-Africa policy tends to be largely focused on migration. Africa has a large infrastructure gap and has slowed down the pace of economic growth. Besides China, there seems to be little willingness to fund infrastructural development in Africa. And I would start with Her Excellency, please. So I think the question is, how do we combine infrastructure coming from Africa or going to Africa?
Thank you. Thank you very much, moderator. If you don't mind, I noticed a number of questions on the live chat. I will just touch on them very briefly, because yes, I think please, they are pertinent before I address your question. One was talking about the GDPR, which is the Internet Data Protection. And I think rather than specifically on the GDPR, I would argue that for Africa, it is important that we enhance our data protection, especially as a way of boosting confidence in interconnectivity in the internet and in the fourth industrial revolution. So we need to unlock the power of ICT. And I believe data protection and related policies and regulations will help us in that area, because by doing so, we can open up the creatives, we can open up innovation, and we can open up the digital space more effectively. So it's not always about, are we connecting well with Europe and so on, but it's more about what is it doing for our own economy and our own environment. A second point, very quickly, was on the diaspora. When I mentioned partnerships, I must admit that diaspora are a crucial part of that partnership, because as we look at private sector, but diaspora can be very effective as part of that private sector, as part of the people who come back and who reinvest in the development of Africa, as sharing experiences and exposure from their opportunities and from their participation in other economies. So indeed, diasporas are very, very crucial as part of the partnership to rebuild the continent. There was a question that was asked about how we can support local production. And I would say that de-globalization is the order of the day, escalated by the current trade wars. We have found that producing at a local level is extremely important. And I have been encouraged to see that even though I flagged tourism, a lot of our economies have also promoted local tourism, so that we get to know our own environments better. So maybe even as the continent, we can do more to travel and to get to know and experience the continent more. And so that's very important. And a very, very big portion of what has been flagged on the questions is the youth. How do we create sustainable youth development? And I think there are a couple of areas. First of all, youth empowerment. And Gerrit highlighted this as well in his presentation, that in other parts of the world, young people can very easily access revenue and support, financial support in certain areas. So in terms of our continent, there has to be a concerted effort to try to provide youth empowerment. And in some of our economies, they are very advanced and sophisticated youth development plans and youth financial mechanisms. So I would motivate for more of that, and for that to be a way to support our youth. But a second area is about youth engagement, because if we do the policies, if we make the arrangements and we treat youth as as something that is acted upon, then I think we are losing an opportunity. Youth are very much part of the solution. They're very much part of the future, that we know for sure. And therefore, let's engage so that we can address the youth bulge and we can make sure that they are integral part of the system. And yes, corruption is a big challenge. I think there's corruption, there's inequality, and there is challenges to democracy, again, issues that have been flagged. And I think by engaging the youth, by ensuring our effectiveness and accountability as a people, we will then be able to address some of these challenges that are there. Specific to the question that you just asked about the EU, and I think I would defer that to Gerrit. What I do know in terms of partnership is that it is important that the priorities for the African continent be flagged, and that Africa should have a seat at the table at which they articulate the agenda, the narrative about what support and what assistance we need as a continent should also emanate. I think in the past, we found that conferences and ideas about how to help or resolve African issues was done without our voice being heard. And I think the only way we are going to kickstart or restart that relationship is to have a much stronger voice and a much stronger acknowledgement of what we need on the continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Mr. Laporte.
Well, to come back to the question that you mentioned, how come that the European side is focusing overly on migration issues and not so much on infrastructural development? I think, first of all, it's true that migration is a very hot issue in Europe, while in Africa it is probably not in the top 5 of key priorities at this very moment. But I question a little bit whether the statement is correct in the sense that the European Union at this moment is focusing very much on infrastructure, energy, transport, connectivity. These are the key topics of the Juncker Alliance of September 2018, and it's also very prominent in the strategy with Africa of the 9th of March of this year, a strategy that came out 2 days before or 5 days before everyone in Europe went into lockdown. So the strategy was already to some extent a bit irrelevant because no reference was made to the pandemic and to health issues. But basically, most of the most recent strategies of the European Union are very much focusing on these infrastructural and economic domains to an extent that I still believe that this is not necessarily always healthy, because there is a whole range of issues out there where the European Union might have a stronger comparative advantage vis-à-vis countries like China and others. And then I'm talking more about what I mentioned earlier, the governance dimensions, the soft values agendas, the social models of societies, even if they are very much under pressure as well these days. There is maybe a track record in terms of fighting inequalities, taxation systems, these type of things. And I believe that this is what should be given more attention, in addition to, of course, the larger economic investments, which are, of course, always essential. But the precondition to make these larger economic investments work are, in a number of cases, governance conditions. And I think this should be given continuous attention, but in a more consistent manner and in a less patronizing way than the Europeans have been doing it, without conditionalities, through other types of incentives that could work to make this governance dimension again a prominent basic precondition for further economic development.
So thank you very much to both our key speakers today. It was a great conversation. We have learned a lot today, and there's still more to be learned. So we thank you very much, Your Excellency, and thank you very much, Mr. Laporte, for joining us today. And
thank you.
Thank you. And now I hand over to Laura, my co-moderator.
We have a lot of Q&As, questions coming from our Q&A, and I want the speakers, if there's a particular question that you've seen that you absolutely want to answer, that will be fine. But I wanted to start us with one question that's a bit of an amalgamation of things I've seen brought up. So we've gotten insights from an NGO, a foundation, thinking of sort of the different components to promote, you know, industries. And so we have a lot of questions regarding how do we think about each one of these roles and the responsibility of these roles within the legacy of colonialism and within sort of the challenges of EU's role, especially given the many important conversations that are being had right now regarding a legacy of racism that is very, very alive right now, and inequities that continue to be very present. So just kind of opening it to all the speakers, when we're thinking about the promotion of growth in Africa and of these links, how do you think about your roles, and how do we think about these legacies that are very present?
Could I?
Or... Yes, please.
Okay.
Inga first, and then Timothy, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's
okay.
Fine.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think a conference like today, and especially having so many Africans in the conference, because too often we see Europeans talking about Africa, not with Africa. That's something which helps. And then I see a lot of parallels in the different contributions we are having today. So there's Anita who's working with diaspora, and then Chioma is speaking about remittances, and I listened a bit to Gerd Napport before, talking about taxation, which can again also touch remittances. And so I think we just have to, as a first step, we have to do this more, these kind of conferences, especially listening to Africa, and then we have to look at our different roles. We as a political foundation, for example, as we also work with political parties who are sometimes also in government, mostly in opposition, we must listen to what's coming up as suggestions from African partners, from people like you here, and try to make them policy shaping. And then other organizations are much more working then with the civil society, and on the basis, other people are working with entrepreneurs, or other people are working with big business. So I think this conference is a good start, and conferences like this to define our different roles and then try to implement them into policy. Thank you.
So I completely agree with Inga. Conferences like this are a very good start, and I really enjoy I really enjoy the fact that engaging and speaking about issues, no matter how sensitive they are usually a very good way of starting to create the kind of change we are looking for. But I also think that there is a place for talking, and there's also a place for acting. We've been talking for a very long time, but we've not really seen any change on ground. On the issues of the legacy of colonialism and racial inequalities that have been existing both in the regional socioeconomics of African continent and also in the global socioeconomics of Africa and the rest of the world, I think that it's always going to be there. So it's good for us to have discussions around how we can create opportunities for restitution and forgiveness, and bringing everybody back to the table and seeing each other as equal. But I also think right now, whilst we are doing that, we also need to have a parallel move of action that should be creating the kind of change we are looking for. This stop, let's talk and create and generate ideas and make change approach is no longer working, because what's happening is we keep talking about it, but the rest of the world is leaving us behind. Now we need to start doing things that create the kind of growth, that we are looking for, and perhaps maybe we could be in an opportunity in the future to have set up growth models that worked for us as a continent that will become cutting edge and be an example to the rest of the world. We have a once in a lifetime opportunity right now to cause a direction for ourselves as a continent that the rest of the world can learn from maybe a few decades from now. And this is very possible because if you look at the kind of growth China, for instance, engineered, we might not all like it, but they took a path and they stayed on that path for everybody says that, you know, there is a thing called the Asian miracle. You know, it happened. So we need to have our own version of the African miracle. And I don't think we're doing anything to actually engineer that at the moment. There's a lot of talking, but there's very little doing. I think the question is, what should we start doing to create the do and the actionable results that we need? And I don't think we need the rest of the world for that. We can do it as a region. We are a regional powerhouse. We don't need the rest of the world to grow. We need to wake up to that fact.
Thank you so much. Any of the other, Anita or Chioma, would you like to address the question?
Yes, I would just like to add, as civil society organization, we are always in a kind of a role which is comfortable, actually, because we can address issues such as this one and also put political pressures on it. But colonialism is something that we address and focus on a daily basis, actually. And what, from my perspective, is important is to put pressure on taking responsibilities. We see some development on the federal level of Baden-Württemberg, which are at least one step, but it's not only about talking, as the speaker said before, it's about to walk the talk. And it's really important to not only have this in mind when it comes to inequalities or something, but also when it comes to the language we use, to the signs that we see. So I think the responsibility starts on the local level in all the countries responsible for this developments, actually.
So much. Chioma? If not, I'm happy to go on to a next question. A question that was asked yesterday and today I've seen it again, and I think this is the right space for it. We've talked a lot about entrepreneurship, about leadership, about youth initiatives, and their challenges. But for people who are trying to have projects started from Africa or NGOs, a lot of times it's very challenging for funding to arrive. Sometimes banks might not trust to transfer funds in particular places that are seen as at risk, perhaps. So if any of you have any advice or experience in that, if you have any thoughts, and I would like to connect that to one of our last questions. So how to motivate, it's not just funding, of course, coming from Europe to Africa. We have to think about the incredible wealth and resources that exist in Africa. So how to motivate the important African elite to invest in Africa. I think that question is directed to Chioma, but I know, Timothy, you were also referring to Africa kind of being able at the core of those answers. So I want to kind of put that all together if possible.
Should Chioma start first and then I probably answer after that? Or Chioma, are you there? I think something might be wrong with her mic. Okay, let me start and then if she can join later. But I think the fact that you've identified an issue already shows that there's also an opportunity for innovation right there. That's already telling us there is a gap in the market for innovative solutions that will take care of those kind of problems. We know that microfinancing is a huge issue everywhere, but we've had quite a lot of microfinance innovation solutions that have cropped up, that have come out from India, for instance, helping with micro business financing in amongst single mothers and mothers in certain regions in India. So there's an opportunity for us to learn from those kind of use cases and see if we can adapt them to the African context. I think there's a lot of crossovers and a lot of similarities in terms of creating microfinancing solutions. Now,
We know the cost of doing business in Africa is high. Everybody knows that. But for every country right now that has the cost of doing business low, they started very high. There is no country in the world that got to the point where they are without first going through similar obstacles as we are currently going through. So we can actually learn from history. There is a lot of things we can learn from history where countries that did not have the institutional foundations they currently have in place, where the rules of the game were against every single. We had that when, modern America was formed, modern United States was forming. We had that when, modern Britain was forming. So we know we can learn from these and adapt them to the African context. But what we shouldn't do is give up. So if you are finding that it is difficult to finance your little businesses and you know what is causing those limitations, that means that's an opportunity for you to actually create a business out of those limitations if you think there's a worthy solution that the market might reward you for. That's what I think I can say.
Thank you so much, Timothy. And I think Chioma has had some issues with technology, so she's off right now, but we hope she'll be able to join. Any of the other speakers who would like to answer to that? Inga, yeah, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is a very, very interesting topic with the youth. I would just like quickly to comment on it in two ways. In terms of political, I think there's a real problem because we see so many, especially old men, governing African countries, but we also see a lot of youth standing up. We've seen that now in Mali. Well, it also happened in Burkina Faso and many countries, but or Bobby Wine, the example I mentioned. So I think something is really happening there with the youth on the political side, and this is very, very important.
I have a question from the audience, which directly asks, how vital is diaspora for developing businesses directly in Africa? Should I repeat that again?
Yes, please.
Yes. So one of the questions that we have from our audience is, how vital is the diaspora for developing African businesses directly?
Well, I think I'm going to jump in there. I think it's very vital for the following reasons. There's a lot of money that flow from the diaspora to Africa, right? And we know that sometimes the government in Africa sometimes cannot sustain necessarily the growth in Africa. I want to talk about entrepreneurship in particular. So the diaspora is very key in the developing Africa by focusing in entrepreneurship and partnership. As I mentioned earlier, yes, we send a lot of money back home and we think it's an investment, which is great, but I think we have to focus on investing in entrepreneurship, but also through a real top partnership, so that way we see effective growth.
Hello.
Thank you so much. Yes, Knox, if you want to add your thoughts.
Yes, thank you very much. And I echo Marco's point, excellent point. I'll just add one tiny other little point, which is it's also useful to remember, I think, that diasporan funds, whether it's remittances or direct diaspora remittances, they stay in Africa. It's not an extractive investment, unlike some other industries. So I think that too is very, very important to bear in mind. Thank you.
So thank you very much. The other question that we have is a question of knowledge transfer from the diaspora back to Africa.
I don't know, Marco, do you want to come in on that, or shall I?
You can go ahead, and I'll come after you.
Okay, thanks. I think knowledge transfer is it's as I mentioned in my presentation. The consultative ability, the knowledge economy is absolutely vital going forward for Africa. I would want to mention though that it's not just a one-way street of knowledge transfer from the diaspora to Africa, because as diasporans we also learn a lot when we engage with our home country. So it's actually a win-win on both sides of the coin. So I think that's also important to mention. But I invite Marco to also come in on that. Thank you.
Well, I think you said it all. Most of the mistake that we in the diaspora we made is sometimes we feel like, we have all the knowledge here. And part of it, sometimes I see a lot of people like, in the area of entrepreneurship, they come with an idea. They want to do business back home and they don't consult with other people back home. We just go in, we're very excited. We know everything. We're coming from the West and we go invest. We lost all the money, things don't go wrong. And then we get disappointed. Right. So in terms of what we just say is it has to be a balance. It has to be like, a win-win where we need also like, to get some information, some knowledge from people back home. Yes, they're back home. They have knowledge. They understand the landscape. And it has to be something mutual from both ends. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Marco, for that. And I really appreciate sort of in a previous presentation, we talked about sort of expanding these rigid paradigms that we have. And it's so important that when we're having these conversations, we're not talking only about, money, knowledge, expertise flow in one way, but in other ways, but also considering the many sort of spaces where Black excellence is key, and sort of Knox, you were mentioning the importance of the diaspora in the creation and the encouragement of certain spaces like ECOSOC and things like that. So that's really key. We had a question from the audience that was interested in hearing from our speakers regarding examples that you have of successful initiatives by the diaspora, and I'll try to modify it a little bit more, by the diaspora or from Africa in conjunction. Are there some key examples do you think offer some really great solutions or successes that we can share with the audience here today? And I'll let whoever wants to take it on.
Yes, so I'm going to go back again to the Leadership Africa Summit that we organized in Togo last year. So one key thing that, we have identified was there's some entrepreneurs that were there, they didn't have the capital necessarily, to do their business. But once we connect them during the day of the conference, one lady in particular was able to meet with somebody, from Canada. And as a result of that person from Canada now start investing in her business and they become partners. And the idea for her is to start exporting her products, back to North America. And I think those are just like, one of the beautiful stories that we see sometimes, like, when you connect two people, that have a similar interest, they can work together and achieve a greater goals.
Thank you, Marco. Knox? Professor Schittenhelm?
I mean, I guess there are examples, small examples, maybe not as much in focus as the big success stories that we might have from the US, but that's exactly the point. Well, cooperations between students coming from Africa, having their studies here in Europe, and then founding a company together with a German or a European partner and introducing that in Africa. I have in mind one particular case of Uganda with electric motorcycles, but there are definitely hundreds of those examples. But well, that's exactly the point that I tried to point out before. I mean, we need to have these little stories, and this will encourage everyone, not only Africans, but also Europeans or from other continents to collaborate. And that's definitely the success story we should look for. But I mean, there was one comment in the chat. I have seen that someone said, well, why do African students not have the same chances to study in Europe, more or less like that? Well, I think that the problem that African students in Europe have is mainly something different. They might have difficulties to adapt to the European system, or vice versa. I can see often that our administration at our university has difficulties of understanding that not everything is clear for someone who's coming from abroad. It's not an African problem, but it's whoever comes, is of course not adapted to the German system, and the administration is so narrow-minded that they don't see that. But what I receive as a feedback from our students, mainly is from the African students, is that they're disappointed once they have received their master degree, that it is very hard to get a job, at least in Germany. And many of them say, well, I really love to work here. I'm grateful that you offered me this opportunity to study here with low tuition fees, of course, but why don't you give me a chance to work here, at least for a while? Yeah, and that's, I believe, is rather a problem here.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Professor. Next, did you have any sort of closing, wrapping up thoughts before we move on to our next discussion?
Well, just to say really a huge thanks to all of you. I've learned a lot from these sessions, and I think that the African diaspora is vital. And I would say, despite all the challenges we've had this year, I'm still optimistic, and I believe for Africa and the diaspora, the future is now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those closing thoughts. And I want to thank once again our 4 speakers for your valuable insights and for pushing us forward in our discussion. We had another speaker at one point who said, talk is really important, but so is action.